Okay, here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. Welcome to you, whoever you are, whether you're new today or whether you're a returning friend. I appreciate that you have chosen to listen. I am very curious about you, whoever you are, that's listening right now. I'm wondering if you're a yoga teacher and you're teaching classes actively, or maybe you're not. Maybe you're just somebody who used to be a yoga teacher, but you're not teaching now, or you're still a yoga teacher, but you're not doing classes, or maybe none of those things. Maybe you're just somebody who's into yoga and for whatever reason you listen to this show. I'm wondering if you are actively attending yoga classes right now, in-person yoga classes, as a regular thing in your week. And how many classes are you going to? And are you going to a yoga center? Are you going to a gym or some other kind of setup? Like, what is the context or the space in which you're attending those classes? I'm also curious if you're someone listening to this who, in the past, like before the pandemic, was doing a lot of traveling and doing workshops or retreats outside of where you live. If you've gone back to doing that travel, and if you've noticed what a shit show it is. Seems like travel is not the same as it used to be. I suppose I've just been thinking a lot about the professional side of being a yoga teacher. You know what it was last week? If you listened, I had my old friend Conchetta on, and we were talking about this golden time in the New York yoga scene from like 1997 to 2007. And we were talking about how yoga teachers were supported by centers, and we had this opportunity to kind of find our practice. And there's this moment in that conversation where we're talking about like how we've managed to like make a living, and about how most people found other things to do. And she didn't know, she hadn't been paying attention to me and like what I've been doing, or necessarily listening to this show. So she didn't know that I've managed to just continue to pay my way just as a yoga teacher, essentially. I mean, I do this podcast, but I don't have other ways that I make money, or other side gigs, or other like letters next to my name that allow me to get other kinds of gigs, you know? And most of the people who were being yoga teachers at that time, when I knew Conchetta in Brooklyn in whatever it was, 2002, they've gone on to like have more letters next to their names. They studied things outside of yoga to give themselves other resources, and I would also say other opportunities. I always ask, is it about legitimacy? And I think that's maybe just my own baggage, because I don't have any other letters, you know? I've been really reflecting on how much, on the one hand, yoga is entirely my spiritual practice. And you know, I've been having all these conversations about higher powers and God. And I have a few conversations in the can that I'm very excited for you all to hear that have to do with that. But at the same time, I have made my living from teaching yoga my whole adult life. And that's why I think so much of what I've done, whether it was the blog or this podcast, often reflects me wanting to understand what's happening with like the kind of business side of things, or the industry, because it affects my life. Like, it affects my ability to provide for myself and my family. What's happening in like the yoga industry, or the business of yoga. And it's just evolved and changed over the years. And I think my ability to keep making my way as a yoga teacher is because of my adapting to those changes and paying attention to them as much as I could, and having the advice of good friends. Shout out to Josh. And I think right now I'm looking at the landscape of what it looks like to be a yoga teacher in 2023 and sort of like what are the models and what are the things that are working and what I'm looking at, like what are other people doing, like trying to see. And it is just really hard to get any kind of read on things. And I just think that some of the ideas that I used to have about stuff, about what was happening in terms of even like fitness orientation and how it was easier to sell a fitness orientation than it was to sell like a more contemplative orientation. Like a lot of these things that I was going on about, like right up until before the pandemic in many ways still, they actually aren't as relevant anymore, it seems to me. It just seems like we're in a completely new landscape, and I don't know how much any of those things apply anymore, like whether or not someone's taking class at a gym or the YMCA or a yoga center. It doesn't, like the space doesn't matter anymore. And even in terms of like practice, what constitutes a more fitness orientation or someone doing it in a more physical way or something more contemplative. I don't know. I don't know, have any clear delineations between things like I used to. And I would also add, and it's relevant to today's conversation with Beth Shaw, which I'll say something about in just a moment. But what I was going to say is that one thing I have definitely been reflecting upon is this moment I'm always talking about. I was talking about it last week with Conchetta, where there was this kind of shift where yoga seemed to go from this like underground counterculture thing that was happening, where it was like hippies from the 60s and then weird artist types in the 80s and 90s or whatever it was. There was this counterculture thing that was where yoga was. And then there was like aerobics and working out at the gym. And those were two entirely separate worlds. And at some point, those worlds definitely crossed over. I remember in the early days, like Sharon and David from Jivamukti, like in the early formative days when Jivamukti was first starting, they both had classes at Crunch Gym. They had like a deal with Crunch Gym and they provided teachers, I think, maybe even. I knew a bunch of teachers who taught at Crunch Gym in New York City in the early days. And I don't think that the classes that they were teaching at Crunch Gym were that different than they were at Jiva, but there probably was some subtle differences. And definitely as time went on, I certainly have had the conversation many times with teachers about how teaching at the gym was very different than teaching at the center. At least up until a certain point, because at some point, I don't know. I don't know if it depends on what center you were teaching at. Some centers became more like gyms, so there wasn't necessarily much of a distinction. In any case, I often talk about how there was a moment where you started to see yoga classes at the gym. And I believe I was talking with Leslie Kamenoff here on this show the last time he was here, maybe it was when I was on his. I can't remember, but shout out to Leslie. He made a point when I was talking about this, about when yoga classes started going to the gym. I always say the same thing, that I felt it had something to do with the popularity of Ashtanga Vinyasa as a style, because Ashtanga was faster paced and it had like more of an aerobic feel, and you would get hot and sweaty while you're doing it. And it was more appealing to people who were at the gym. It fit in with the gym culture better than like a more, I don't know, integral style where you were doing like eye rolls and shavasana between each pose, or chanting, or doing some of these other stuff, like a fast-paced vinyasa class, especially when they started getting hybrided like the Jiva stuff. That made it fit much better into that culture, I felt like. And I said that to Leslie, and he said, yeah, that's true. But if you really want to talk about yoga coming into the gyms, you got to get Beth Shaw from YogaFit on your show. And it just struck into my mind. I remembered YogaFit. And I remember actually meeting Beth, I think it was, at a yoga therapy conference in 2009. And I just realized that's right. You see, it isn't just like some trend and style that happened in yoga. There was actual people who made it happen, who actually brought yoga classes into the gym. And Beth Shaw is one of those people. She was really fundamental in the process of that happening. So I reached out to Beth, and I'll say we had some difficulties. First, nailing down some time wasn't that easy. And then when we finally did, we ran into some technical stuff, and we got started late, and then we ended up getting cut a little bit short because of that. At the same time, we got a good chunk of what I was hoping to talk about. And so I wanted to share it with you all the same. I do think that Beth is an important voice in that history of yoga going from underground to mainstream. And I do think we managed to get a snapshot of who Beth is and what she's done with YogaFit and what's happening now, what she's doing now. As I was saying, we're in kind of new waters, and I think she speaks some to that as well. So we got what we got, and I'm happy to bring it to you today. Real quick before we get to that, I do have a couple of announcements. First, if you are interested in participating in my year-long teacher training, we are currently still offering the opportunity to start anytime at half the regular price. We're doing this until August. You know, a lot of people out there are not in the best financial places, and we want to make it possible for as many people to do it as we can. If you're looking for a place to engage with other folks who have a passion for study and yoga, and you've connected with me here on the show, and you think that I might be a person that you could do that with, the teacher training is a really good place to do that. And you can currently start anytime for half the regular price. Also, I do have some in-person events happening that I want to mention. I'm going to be in Garden City, New York on July 29th. I'm going to be in Manchester, England on September 23rd and 24th. And I'm going to be in Dublin, Ireland, September 30th and October 1st. And if you live in the vicinity of any of those places, I would very much like to see you. There's limited spaces in those events, and you can currently register. You can find out about the teacher training, the in-person events, as well as all the other stuff in between. There's lots of other options available. All of my stuff can be found at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, y'all. I think that's fine. I will touch base with you on the other side, but let's go ahead and get to this talk that I had with Beth Shaw. Hello.
Hi there.
Hi, Beth. So sorry for all the trouble. Can you hear me okay?
I can. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you for hanging in there. I'm glad we finally were able to sync up and find at least a few moments to chat. I appreciate you doing this. Thank you.
Sure.
And I am already recording. If it's okay with you, I'd like to consider us having just begun.
Of course, yes.
Very cool. Well, thank you, Beth. I think I mentioned to you in an email, but I'll say it again here for anybody else who might listen to this. What prompted me to reach out to you and invite you to come on the show? It's been a long part of this show that I wanted to try to tell some oral history about the way yoga came from the East to the West, and then how it went from sort of relative obscurity to a more mainstream phenomena in the West. And I've often spoken about this one particular period of time, which I kind of pin somewhere like in the mid to late 90s, where there was a really big shift. And the hallmark of that shift for me was always that there started to be yoga classes at the gym. That when I first got into yoga, there was no yoga classes at the gym. And then at some point, there started to be yoga classes at the gym. And I've always kind of attributed it some to the popularity of like Ashtanga Vinyasa as a style, some because it was a more like physically rigorous style. You could kind of get a sweat on. It wasn't quite as like boring as some of the other like styles at the ashrams, you know? And I've often said that theory that it was like Ashtanga that like brought it to the gyms. And I said that on the show not too long ago to Leslie Kaminoff. And he, in only the way that he could, in the very rational, pragmatic way, said, well, actually, if you want to talk about yoga coming into the gyms, then you need to get Beth Shaw from YogaFit on your show. And it occurred to me that he was absolutely right, that while there may have been some kind of like stylistic thing happening, there was actual people who kind of made it happen. And you seem to me to be like a real pioneer in terms of bringing yoga to the fitness world. And I guess I'm happy to have you here to kind of hear you tell us about some of whether one, you think that's true and about how that happened. So I guess I'm curious for you, prior to like the mid 90s, were you into like fitness first, or were you into yoga first, or were you into both at the same time? Like, how does it start to come about for you, like before you end up calling it YogaFit?
Well, I'll back up to tell you that I taught myself how to do guided meditation and imagery when I was 6 years old because I suffered from horrible migraine headaches. I tell this story in my latest book, Healing Trauma with Yoga. So I guess I was practicing at an early age. I was doing yoga as a child, although I didn't necessarily know what it was. I've also been working out in health clubs since age 15 and was a huge fan of fitness and nutrition. And I moved to Los Angeles after college. I started taking more formal yoga. At that time, my first teacher was Renee Taylor. She was 93 years old. And I took a teacher training in 1992, and they didn't really teach me how to teach in the health club environment. So when I went back to Los Angeles and started teaching in a variety of health clubs, I came up with a style that really seemed to work for health club participants. The name YogaFit had come to me on a bike ride in 1994. I had trademarked the name. I was doing a cable TV show. And, so I created a style that really seemed to work in all these different health clubs I was teaching in. I called it YogaFit. I had a logo. I made clothing. I was doing my cable show. And one of my students, who was an angel investor, really liked what I was doing and helped me form the company. And we've been doing teacher training since 1997. The first one we did was in Fargo, North Dakota in September of 1997. We've been doing trainings internationally ever since. We've really trained millions of people all over the world. And I believe that YogaFit, in part, was really responsible for the growth and popularity of yoga in the United States, because all of a sudden, we were taking fitness instructors, turning them into yoga instructors. They already understood what it meant to teach a safe class, which is very important when you're dealing with people doing yoga, especially new practitioners. And, that's the short story of how it all got started.
Well, thank you for that. It's a good introduction for everybody, because that is what I was saying earlier. Like you did kind of pioneer that bridge. And I guess I'm curious about when you said that you first mentioned your first teacher, Renee Taylor. I guess I'm curious, like, what was the yoga that you were exposed to like, and what did you feel that you changed or added to it to help it fit more in the context of the fitness people that you were interested in practicing with?
Well, as a yoga student, I participated in every single style I could get to, from Shivananda to Iyengar to Ashtanga. But YogaFit really follows the traditional group exercise model of warm-up, work, cool down. We also have trainings just on languaging at YogaFit, and we use what we call transformational language to make students feel included, make them feel successful, and create part of the experience. So it's not just what we're teaching physically, but it's the flow, the formatting, the warm-up, the languaging, the energy that we bring. So it's a very comprehensive program at its most basic level. Now, obviously, we've been a school for over 25 years, so we have about 200 different educational modules, including yoga therapy, our Warriors track, where we deal with trauma-sensitive yoga that is celebrating its 10th year in existence. It was written by a Lieutenant Army military colonel who is also a YogaFit trainer. So we've really expanded our offerings since we started, but the basic tenets of YogaFit is to keep people safe and have them experience an enjoyable, transformational class.
And you said earlier that you had a cable TV show. Is that right? Did you have a cable TV show before it was like a training program for people?
Yes, I did.
And what were you doing on the cable TV show?
Oh, well, we were doing yoga, having wellness and health and nutrition experts come in and do segments. Yeah.
I see. And so when does it occur to you? You said you had somebody who was interested in investing. When does it become like a plan to have like a training program? You said you had clothing and like a logo and stuff. Does it start out as you?
Yeah,
How does it?
I opened up a health club, yoga studio within a health club in 1994 in Redondo Beach, California. And
see, they did that a lot. I was going to say they did that a lot later, where they would have like a dedicated yoga room at the gym at some point.
I believe we may have been one of the first ones, if not the first ones, to do that. Yeah. I really saw a need in the fitness industry for safe and effective yoga that would appeal to people who actually like to go to a gym and work out.
I see. And so I guess my question then is, they often say, you give a percentage of what someone's looking for to give them a percentage of what you think they need. So if you had to put percentages, how much of it is yoga and how much is it fitness, or do you not even distinguish between those two things?
Well, I mean, it's really all yoga. There may be some push-ups added in or whatever, but it's all yoga, just done in a way that makes sense for the body, for anatomy, for kinesiology, for allowing for differences between different body types, levels of flexibility, skill set levels, ages, etc. So we really allow the practice to meet the client where they are.
Right. And I guess it's interesting to me because I, in getting ready to talk with you today, heard you talk about when the name YogaFit came to you, as well as other key moments in your life, and you referred to them as spiritual interventions. And I guess I think I appreciate that as acknowledging that as being the source of a lot of the things that you've done. I guess I find that interesting in the sense that, as I understand it, YogaFit was not necessarily teaching overt spirituality, was it?
In my personal experience and belief system, having studied yoga all over the world and studied various Asia and done a lot of plant medicine. When you open people up and give them some space, the opportunity for spiritual intervention, for inner guides, for your archangels, whatever you want to call it, they have the ability to, there becomes a sense of clarity with the space, and we give people a tremendous amount of space, physically and mentally, to have their own experience and experience some sort of transformation.
And was it always about that kind of space and transformation from the beginning, or did it evolve more into that over time?
I believe that it was like that from the beginning. Perhaps it was overt, but you know, it's always been my intention just to give people space, and that's evidenced in the way we teach. You know, we're not talking the whole time. We're not bombarding students with I statements. I want you to do this and I want you to do that. We don't require people to come back for recertification. You know, I really like an organic, natural approach to everything, whether it's to business or whether it's to one's transformation.
I mean, I think it made a lot of sense that there was already people who were trained in how to teach classes that involve people engaging with their bodies. So, like you said, they were already knowledgeable in many ways, and I guess finding a way to translate yoga into that context, because it is a kind of different context, like mirrors on the walls and like tennis shoes, right? It might be a little different.
You know, it's a very different context. And I've been to enough yoga classes where I've seen like flows that just don't make any sense, transitions that are choppy and awkward. So again, it's the style, the delivery, the music, the languaging. If I'm teaching a class, it's also about the lighting. So I really try to make it participant-centric.
I got you. It makes sense to me. And I think I'm curious, how structured was it at the beginning? And again, I'm curious about how things evolved over time. So is there like a script that people learn? Are there certain set classes or protocols that people were learning? I mean, I think a lot of more systems often do that, like you learn a sequence, and then maybe you have some freedom to change it or not. How rigid was the structure?
Well, in our level 1 training and many of our other levels, we do give suggested class formats, but we also give transition blocks so that it makes sense for the physical body. And it's hard for me to articulate, but if anybody listening wants to take a YogaFit level 1 training, I guarantee that it will change the way you think about yoga, you experience yoga, and if you're an instructor, the way you instruct.
And that's, I assume that's not just because of sequencing, though. That's because of language and other kinds of things that you're including in that, right?
It's the totality of the experience.
Right. All right. Well, then I guess I'm curious how you mentioned you had like a yoga room at this one fitness center. When is there a point when you remember that the idea of kind of scaling it, or that it like reaching out much farther started to happen? Do you remember that?
I do, because my background is I'm a writer. I've written 4 books, all which have the word yoga in the title. And I wrote an article for a fitness trade magazine. And in exchange for the article, they let me submit an ad, which I made. And it said, I hire, train, and consult on your yoga programming. And we got 250 responses to that ad, which led to our first training in Fargo, North Dakota.
And do you remember how many people were in the first training?
Yeah, about 25. It's funny because someone just reached out to me today via email that wants to be on my radio show, Make America Healthy. And she continues to host YogaFit trainings at her facility till this day.
Now, at that point, There wasn't like a 200-hour Yoga Alliance standard, or was there? I can't remember. It might have been right around there.
There was not. No, there wasn't. Yoga Alliance didn't even exist. I know because it took us a long time to get our Yoga Alliance certificate, and I think we got it in 2002. And you know, these days my dog could really get his own Yoga Alliance certification. So the standards have changed, and not for the better. I will say that we had to jump through a lot of hoops back in the day, and you know, people in the yoga community were not a fan of YogaFit. I put up with a lot of judgment, a lot of expectation, probably based on competition, and really everything that yoga isn't. But I believe in what I'm doing. Obviously, millions of people have as well, and we have a team of 50 YogaFit master trainers, many of whom are doctors, psychologists, Ayurvedic specialists, government leaders, military people. So, you know, it's not just me. We've got an amazing team of educational experts and a great board of directors. You know, hundreds of thousands of people around the world who have benefited from the YogaFit style and methodology.
Well, I absolutely think that's true. And I want to concede to you, because I think I was maybe one of those people who had like a negative feeling, but not really necessarily towards you or YogaFit, but more just to the idea, because like a fitness orientation became so predominant in the yoga world. At a certain point, if you were someone who were like interested in a more like contemplative or meditative style, and we're having difficulty getting anybody interested because it's hard to sell people on like subtle inquiries when, you know, they're looking for abs. Because, you know, you and I may have met at one point. I think it might have been at a yoga therapy conference in 2009. Or somebody from YogaFit. I don't know if it was you. I was introduced to somebody at that conference. And in that moment, I remember kind of like harboring a little bit of like a feeling, but I will say, looking back at it now in retrospect, I don't see it the same. And I want to say, as someone who might have given you some grief, although I don't think I was giving you any grief directly, I think you're right that you bringing yoga in the way that made the most sense to you, certainly in line with the progression of yoga into the West, you know?
Well, thank you for that, and I appreciate the feedback and the honesty. Just know that you were not in the minority, if that makes you feel any better.
Well, I guess that was, you certainly had like a drive behind what you were doing. You were inspired to bring yoga in this way. And I guess part of that must have been because people were benefiting from it, as you said. And you know, in yoga's original inception in India, it was for men only. It was reserved for the upper class, much like you know, becoming a Zen monk was, and in Japan. And if it is just my goal that as many people on the planet do yoga as possible. I think now more than ever we need it for so many reasons. Obviously, the mental health component, but also if you look around, everybody's hunched over their phones, bad posture. You know, we've got a mental health crisis. I personally practice every single day in some way, shape, or form. And I see so many people in my own life that I can't convince to engage in that practice. So my goal is just a simple one, and that is, you know, the world doing yoga. And what's interesting is now we're bringing it to the healthcare system in Japan. I have one of my colleagues from Harvard Business School who owns 3 hospitals and is opening up a diagnostic wellness hotel. We're opening a YogaFit studio in that hotel. We've trained even his uncle, who is the chief of orthopedic surgery, in many of our programs, including our yoga menopause program, Yoga for the Change. So we are making inroads wherever we can. I can appreciate that. And I I appreciate what you said about wanting to bring yoga to like the grassroots experience of people. I felt similarly about yoga therapy, that like more yoga class, all yoga classes needed more yoga therapy in them, that it didn't want to be relegated just to like universities and hospitals. So I guess you did incorporate yoga therapy into what you were doing. Is that a separate program from the YogaFit, or just like a continuation of it?
It's one of our programs. We have a 900 yoga, IAYT approved program.
Right.
And people love it because, again, the foundation is solid. And like building a house or building a business, having a solid foundation enables you to continue to add on and really experience benefits.
I see. And how big did it get, or is it, like, in terms of like the amount of people that you have to employ to run all the YogaFit operations? And then I imagine the pandemic might have changed some of that.
Well, we were an all live entity, an all live school prior to the pandemic. We were running 15 conferences a year across North America. We were running about 1,000 weekend trainings a year worldwide. We went to an all virtual model during the pandemic. We have brought back in person. I will tell you that people are still a little reluctant to come back to in person. I think we're down to about 3-4 conferences a year. We've got one actually coming up. We've got one going on right now in Minneapolis, Minnesota, but we've got one coming up in July in Scottsdale. And then we're done with our conferences for the year. So, the pandemic unfortunately hurt a lot of things. And, but, we still have those 50 master trainers that are leading the trainings, whether it's virtual or virtual live or in person. And I can't wait to go to our Scottsdale conference. I love being with this YogaFit community. It is such a beautiful community. And, I belong to a lot of different business organizations and groups, and I have to say that the YogaFit community is the most supportive, embracing community that I've ever been around. In fact, our YogaFit essence is no judgment, no expectation, no competition. Listen to your body, be in the moment, breathe, feel. And I was at a YogaFit Warriors training about 5 years ago, and within the first half hour, someone told us she had shot and killed her husband with a 12-gauge shotgun. Oof. And no one batted an eye. And it was a domestic abuse thing. But no one batted an eye, and that to me speaks volumes to the support and the trust that we create for people, and which is why they love to come to live trainings and events, because of the group interaction and the bonding. It's so beautiful.
Wow. So that's always been kind of an integral part of the larger operation, is these conferences, because that's a time where like more regional teachers and students come together.
Yeah. We've been doing conferences since January of 2002, we did our first one in Manhattan Beach, California. We had Dr. Barry Sears as our keynote speaker. I'm actually working on my 5th book with Barry. It's been a very interesting ride, and I'm very grateful. I'm very blessed because as a curious spiritual seeker, it has propelled me to keep learning and growing and developing as a person, and then bringing some of those learnings back to the larger YogaFit community. And it's a big responsibility and a huge blessing,
And is there any kind of oversight of your YogaFit teachers, or is it just that you trust that they were trained well and then you send them off to be in their own way?
No, we have a very robust apprentice program that they have to go through. They all have primary fitness certifications, obviously all the Yoga Alliance credentials, IAYT if they're doing our yoga therapy program, and I'm starting a mind-body leadership coaching
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.